I was 12 years old the first time I realized some words never really leave you. They stay stuck in the back of your mind, quietly following you into every room, every decision, every sleepless night. And the worst part is, sometimes those words come from people who are supposed to make you feel safe. That summer started like every other summer at my grandmother's old house. The ceiling fans barely worked, the air smelled like dust and cooked onions, and all the adults acted like kids should stay invisible unless they were being useful. My mom had just started working double shifts at a diner 2 towns away, so she left me there almost every day with my aunt and cousins while she tried to keep our lives together. I remember feeling out of place from the moment I walked through that front door. My cousins shared jokes I wasn't part of. My aunt treated me more like a burden than family. Even at 12, I could tell she looked at me differently. Like I was some extra responsibility nobody asked for. But kids are good at pretending things don't hurt. I'd sit quietly in the corner drawing in my notebook while everyone else laughed in the kitchen. I'd help wash dishes without being asked. I'd stay out of the way. Somewhere deep down, I thought if I became easy enough to love, maybe people finally would. Then one afternoon everything changed. It was one of those painfully hot days where even breathing felt heavy. My cousins were outside playing in the yard while I stayed inside folding laundry because my aunt told me I owed her for eating their food. I still remember hearing the screen door slam as she walked into the room behind me. At first, I thought she was just angry about something small again. Maybe I folded a towel wrong. Maybe I forgot to separate the socks. With her, it could be anything. But then she laughed under her breath and said something that completely stopped me. "You know," she said, "nobody actually wanted you here." I froze. At 12 years old, you don't really know how to process a sentence like that. Your brain hears it, but your heart refuses to believe it at first. She kept going like it was nothing. "Your mom dumped you here because she had no choice. Your dad disappeared years ago. And honestly, everyone's lives would probably be easier if you weren't around causing problems all the time." I didn't cry right away. That's the strange thing. When someone breaks your heart badly enough, sometimes you just go numb first. I stood there holding a towel in my hands while every insecurity I'd ever had suddenly felt real. Every moment I felt unwanted. Every time I noticed people getting quieter when I walked into a room. Every birthday forgotten. Every promise broken. All of it came crashing down at once. And my aunt? She just walked away like she hadn't shattered something inside me forever. That night I barely slept. I stared at the cracked ceiling in my grandmother's spare bedroom while everyone else snored down the hallway. I kept replaying her words over and over in my head. Nobody actually wanted you here. The scary part was, a piece of me believed her. I started thinking about my dad, who left before I was old enough to remember his face properly. I thought about my mom constantly apologizing for working late. I thought about how I never really felt like I belonged anywhere. For the first time in my life, I stopped imagining things would magically get better. Something inside me changed that night. By morning, I had made a decision that would completely alter the course of my life. I wasn't going to stay somewhere I felt unwanted anymore. At first it started small. I packed a backpack with a few clothes, my notebook, and the little bit of money I'd secretly saved from helping neighbors carry groceries. I didn't really have a plan. I was 12. What kind of plan could I possibly have? But hurt can make people brave in dangerous ways. I waited until the afternoon when everyone was distracted. My aunt was yelling at my cousins in the kitchen, the television was blasting some game show in the living room, and nobody noticed me slipping out the side gate. I remember looking back at the house one last time. Part of me expected someone to come after me. Someone to notice. Someone to care enough to stop me. But nobody did. So I kept walking. At first, I told myself I'd only leave for a few hours. Maybe long enough to scare them a little. Maybe long enough for somebody to realize they actually wanted me there after all. But as the sun started setting and nobody came looking, that tiny hope inside me slowly disappeared. And somewhere between the empty roads, the summer heat, and the sound of my shoes scraping against cracked pavement, I made another decision. If nobody wanted me in their life, then I would build one of my own. What happened after that summer became something nobody in my family ever expected. Not my aunt. Not my mother. Not even me. Because disappearing was only the beginning. I kept walking until the neighborhood streets slowly turned into roads I didn't recognize anymore. The sun was dropping lower behind the trees, and for the first time since leaving my grandmother's house, fear finally started catching up to me. During the day, anger had pushed me forward. Hurt had made me feel stronger than I really was. But now the sky was turning orange, stores were closing, and I was just a 12-year-old kid carrying a backpack that suddenly felt way too heavy. I remember sitting down at a bus stop near an old gas station, pretending I knew exactly what I was doing. Cars passed by every few seconds, but nobody looked twice at me. Adults always say kids are dramatic, but the truth is most people don't notice lonely children at all. I counted the money in my pocket 3 times. $23 and some coins. That was all I had to my name. Still, a strange part of me felt lighter than I had in years. Nobody was yelling at me. Nobody was making me feel like I was taking up too much space. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe without waiting for someone to criticize me. But freedom feels different when you're hungry. By the time night arrived, my stomach hurt badly enough that I finally walked into a small convenience store near the highway. The cold air inside hit my face instantly. I wandered through the aisles pretending to look around while secretly calculating what I could afford. A sandwich or a bottle of water. Not both. I ended up buying crackers and the cheapest drink I could find. The cashier barely looked at me while handing over the change, but an older man standing near the coffee machine kept staring like he was trying to figure something out. I avoided eye contact and left quickly. That became my routine for the next few days. Rest. Find somewhere quiet. Keep moving. I slept in places nobody would notice me. Behind buildings. Near empty playgrounds. Once even under a picnic shelter near a baseball field. I told myself it was temporary, but deep down I had no idea what I was doing anymore. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the exhaustion. It was the silence. When you spend your whole life believing nobody wants you around, eventually you stop expecting anyone to come looking. Still, every time I heard footsteps nearby or saw a familiar-looking car, my heart jumped for a second. Maybe my mom was searching for me. Maybe she cared more than my aunt claimed. But day after day passed and nothing happened. No one came. I started wondering if my aunt had told everyone I'd just wandered off for attention. Honestly, I could already hear the way she'd say it. He'll come back when he gets hungry. Except I didn't go back. Partly because I was stubborn. But mostly because I was scared that if I returned, my aunt's words would become permanent truth in my mind. I couldn't survive hearing them again. Around the 5th day things started getting harder. The summer heat was brutal and my clothes were dirty from sleeping outside. I avoided groups of teenagers because they laughed at anyone who looked weak. I stayed away from adults who asked too many questions. Every conversation felt dangerous because I didn't want anyone calling my family. I wasn't trying to disappear forever back then. I just wanted to feel like I mattered somewhere. One afternoon, while sitting behind a grocery store eating leftover bread someone had thrown away, I noticed an older woman watching me from across the parking lot. At first, I thought she was going to yell at me for being there. Instead, she slowly walked over and held out a small paper bag. "You look hungry," she said quietly. Inside were 2 bananas, a sandwich, and a bottle of water. I didn't know what to say. People weren't usually kind without wanting something in return. At least that's what life had taught me so far. "Thank you," I mumbled. She nodded but didn't leave right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the backpack beside me. "You out here alone?" The question instantly made my chest tighten. I lied without even thinking. "My uncle's nearby." She looked like she didn't believe me, but she also didn't push further. Before walking away, she said something that stuck with me for years. Sometimes adults say cruel things because they're unhappy with themselves. Don't build your whole future around someone else's bitterness. At 12 years old, I didn't fully understand what she meant. But hearing kindness after days of loneliness almost broke me. That night, I cried for the first time since leaving home. Not loud crying. Just quiet tears while staring up at the dark sky behind an abandoned building. I kept thinking about my mom. About whether she was worried. About whether she blamed herself. Then another thought crept into my head. What if she hadn't even noticed yet? The next morning, everything changed again. I was washing my face in a public restroom when I overheard 2 workers talking near the entrance. "You hear about that missing kid?" "Yeah. They showed his picture on the local news last night." My entire body froze. One of them continued talking while my heartbeat pounded so loudly I could barely hear. "They think he ran away from family or something." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I grabbed my backpack and rushed outside before anyone could look at me too closely. My hands were shaking badly now. Until that moment, disappearing had almost felt unreal, like some strange adventure fueled by anger and sadness. But hearing the words "missing kid" changed everything. Suddenly, I imagined my mom crying. I imagined police cars. Questions. People searching. And for the first time since I left, guilt started mixing with the hurt. I told myself I should go home. I really did. But then I remembered my aunt's voice again. "Nobody actually wanted you here." So instead of turning back, I made a choice that would push me even farther away from the life I used to know. And just a few hours later, I climbed into a stranger's truck heading out of town. The truck driver introduced himself as Frank. He looked older, maybe in his late 50s, with tired eyes and a baseball cap that had grease stains all over it. His voice was rough but not unfriendly. He said he delivered produce between small towns and noticed me standing near the road looking lost. "You waiting on somebody?" he asked after a few miles passed in silence. I stared out the window and shrugged. Sort of. Even then, I knew not to tell strangers too much. Every warning adults ever gave me still lived in the back of my mind, even after everything else fell apart. Frank didn't push for details. He just nodded and turned the radio down lower. The farther we drove, the more unreal my old life started to feel. My grandmother's house, my cousins, my aunt's voice screaming through the kitchen. It all began fading behind miles of highway and unfamiliar towns. Part of me liked that feeling. Another part felt guilty for liking it. At a gas station stop later that evening, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself. My hair looked messy, my face was thinner, and the dark circles under my eyes made me look older than 12. That scared me more than I wanted to admit. Kids always imagine running away differently. In movies there's adventure and freedom. In reality there's exhaustion. There's constantly checking over your shoulder. There's trying to act invisible while secretly hoping someone sees you. Frank eventually dropped me near a small town a few hours away. Before leaving, he handed me $20 folded tightly in his palm. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said quietly. "Just be careful who you trust." I tried refusing the money at first, but he insisted. Then he drove away. I stood there alone again, watching the truck disappear into the dark road until the headlights were gone. That town became my world for the next few weeks. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know each other. Old diners. Faded storefronts. People sitting outside barber shops talking about the weather like time moved slower there. I quickly realized small towns could be both comforting and dangerous. Comforting because people notice strangers. Dangerous for the exact same reason. I spent most days staying near the edge of town where fewer people paid attention to me. There was an abandoned storage shed behind an old hardware store where I started sleeping at night. It wasn't much, but it kept me hidden from rain and wind. Every morning, I'd wake up early before anyone saw me and wander through town pretending I belonged there. That's when I met Lena. She worked at a small diner near the train tracks. I first noticed her because she always looked exhausted but still smiled at customers anyway. She couldn't have been older than 17 or 18. One morning while I sat outside pretending to read an old newspaper someone left behind, she walked out carrying a trash bag and stopped when she saw me. "You've been around here a lot lately," she said. My stomach tightened instantly. "I'm visiting family," I lied again. She looked unconvinced but didn't argue. Instead, she disappeared back inside the diner and returned a minute later holding a paper plate with pancakes on it. "They made extra." I knew she was lying, but I accepted the food anyway. After that, she started talking to me whenever business was slow. Nothing too personal at first. Just small things. Asking my name. Telling me which stores let kids refill water bottles for free. Complaining about rude customers. For the first time since leaving home, I felt something dangerous starting to happen. I was beginning to trust someone. That terrified me. Because trust meant disappointment could follow. One afternoon, while wiping down tables near the window, Lena suddenly asked, "Are people looking for you?" The question hit me so hard I almost dropped my drink. I tried pretending not to hear her. But she kept watching me carefully. "There's been flyers," she said softly. "A kid around your age." My chest tightened again. So they really were searching. I wanted to ask if my mom looked worried in the picture. I wanted to ask if my aunt was pretending to care now that other people were paying attention. But I couldn't force the words out. Instead, I got defensive. "I'm fine." Lena nodded slowly, but her expression changed after that. Less casual. More concerned. Over the next few days I started noticing little things. The diner owner staring at me longer than before. People in town whispering while looking in my direction. A police car slowly driving past the park where I usually sat. Paranoia started creeping into everything. I stopped sleeping properly again. Every sound outside the storage shed made me panic. Every stranger felt like a threat. Even kindness started making me nervous because I worried someone would eventually ask too many questions. Then one evening, everything got worse. I was sitting behind the diner waiting for Lena to finish her shift when I overheard two customers talking near the parking lot. "They think the boy might have been taken." "No, I heard he ran because of family problems." Either way, his mother's been losing her mind on television. I felt physically sick hearing that. My mother was on television? Suddenly, All the anger I'd been carrying started mixing with guilt in a way I couldn't control anymore. I imagined her crying while strangers asked questions about me. I imagined her blaming herself for leaving me at my grandmother's house. For the first time, I started wondering if my aunt had lied about more than just being unwanted. Maybe my mom really did care. Maybe she always had. But another voice inside me kept fighting back. If she cared so much, why did she leave you there all the time? That question haunted me constantly after that. Meanwhile, Lena's behavior kept changing too. She became quieter around me, like she was debating something internally. Twice, I caught her staring at one of the missing flyers taped near the diner register. She knew. Maybe she'd known from the beginning. And deep down, I think I knew what was coming next. Because one rainy evening, after the diner had almost emptied out, Lena sat across from me in the booth and said 6 words that made my entire body go cold. "I think we need to talk." Rain tapped softly against the diner windows while I sat frozen across from Lena. The place was nearly empty now except for an older couple finishing coffee near the counter. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, flickering red across the wet pavement. "I think we need to talk." Those 6 words hit harder than I expected. My first instinct was to run. Not because Lena sounded angry, but because she sounded serious. And serious conversations usually meant bad news. They meant adults making decisions for you. They meant losing whatever small control you thought you had left. I stared down at the table, trying to act calm while my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the rain anymore. Lena folded her arms carefully. "You don't have to panic." That only made me panic more. "I'm not panicking," I muttered. "You haven't touched your food in 10 minutes. I glanced at the untouched fries between us. She was right. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then she sighed quietly and lowered her voice. "I saw your picture on the news again this morning." There it was. The thing I'd been dreading. Part of me wanted to deny everything one more time. But another part was exhausted from lying. Exhausted from pretending I wasn't scared. Lena looked at me differently now, not like some random kid hanging around town, but like someone carrying a secret too heavy for him. "They said your mom's been searching everywhere," she continued softly. "Different towns. Shelters. Bus stations." My chest tightened instantly. I looked away before she could see the expression on my face. For weeks, I'd convinced myself nobody really cared where I went. That eventually everyone would move on without me. Hearing otherwise felt confusing in the worst possible way. Because if my mom was truly looking for me, then why did I still feel abandoned? Lena leaned closer across the booth. "What happened at home?" The question sat between us heavily. I opened my mouth twice before words finally came out. "My aunt said nobody wanted me there." Even saying it aloud made me feel stupid. Weak. Like I should have been stronger than a few cruel sentences. But Lena didn't laugh. Instead, her face changed completely. "What?" I shrugged, pretending it didn't matter even though it clearly still did. "She said my mom dumped me there because nobody wanted me around." Silence filled the booth after that. Not awkward silence. The kind that happens when someone suddenly understands more than you expected them to. Lena stared at the rain-covered window for a second before speaking again. "You know adults can be wrong, right?" I almost laughed at that. When you're 12, adults seem like they control reality itself. Their words become facts whether they're true or not. Especially when you already feel invisible. "She meant it," I whispered. Lena looked back at me carefully. "Maybe. Or maybe she wanted you to feel small because she was miserable herself." That sounded impossible to me. Cruel people always seem powerful when you're young. You don't realize until later how broken they actually are. Before I could respond, the bell above the diner door suddenly rang. Both of us looked up instantly. A police officer stepped inside. My stomach dropped so fast it physically hurt. The officer removed his rain-covered hat and nodded politely toward the counter, but I barely noticed anything else after that. My vision tunneled. My hands went cold. Lena noticed immediately. "Hey," she whispered quickly. "Relax." But I couldn't. Every fear I'd been carrying crashed into me at once. I imagined being dragged back home. I imagined my aunt staring at me with that smug look on her face. I imagined everyone treating me like some stupid kid who caused problems for attention. The officer started talking casually with the diner owner near the register. Then he glanced around the room. My entire body locked up. Lena reacted before I did. "Kitchen?" she whispered. "What?" "Go. Now." I didn't argue. I slipped out of the booth and hurried through the swinging kitchen doors while trying not to look suspicious. The cooks barely noticed me as I moved toward the back storage area near the freezer. My breathing became uneven. I hated how scared I felt. I pressed myself against the wall near stacks of canned supplies while voices echoed faintly from the diner. Every second stretched forever. Were they talking about me? Did they already know I was here? I kept replaying the missing posters in my mind. My face taped onto walls and gas stations. Strangers recognizing me before I even spoke. It suddenly felt impossible that I'd stayed hidden this long. Then I heard footsteps entering the kitchen. I froze. But it was only Lena. "He's asking questions," she whispered. My throat tightened. "About me?" She hesitated just long enough to answer my question. "Yeah." A wave of panic rushed through me so hard I thought I might throw up. "What did you say?" "That I didn't know anything." I studied her face carefully. She seemed nervous now too. "Listen," she said quietly, "you can't keep doing this forever." I knew that already. But hearing someone else say it made everything feel more real. Outside, thunder rumbled across the town. Rain hammered harder against the roof now, filling the silence between us. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Lena said something unexpected. "My dad left when I was 9. I blinked in surprise. She leaned against the storage shelf, arms folded tightly. One day he just disappeared. No explanation. No goodbye. She gave a small bitter laugh. Spent years wondering what was wrong with me. I didn't know what to say. You start believing people leaving means you weren't worth staying for, she continued quietly. That kind of thinking messes with your head. Her words hit painfully close. Because that was exactly how I felt. Like everyone eventually realized I wasn't worth keeping around. Lena looked directly at me now. But running away doesn't magically fix that feeling. Before I could answer, the kitchen door swung open again. This time it was the diner owner. His face looked tense. "Officer wants to ask everyone a few questions before he leaves," he said. My heartbeat stopped. The owner's eyes shifted toward me briefly. Not angry. Not cruel. Concerned. That somehow felt even worse. Lena stepped slightly in front of me. "He's just a kid." "I know," the owner replied softly. "That's exactly the problem." The room suddenly felt too small. Too hot. Too loud. Outside, I could see police lights reflecting through the rain-soaked windows now. Red and blue flashes cutting across the dark parking lot. For the first time since I disappeared that summer, I realized the life I'd built away from my family was finally starting to collapse. And deep down, I knew I was about to face a choice I wasn't ready to make. The flashing police lights outside painted the kitchen walls red and blue while nobody moved for a second. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the rain now. The diner owner rubbed his forehead nervously before looking back at Lena. "He's asking if anyone's seen the missing boy." Missing boy. Hearing myself described that way felt strange. Like I'd become a story instead of a person. Lena crossed her arms. "So what?" "So half this town already suspects it's him," the owner whispered sharply. "People talk." My stomach twisted instantly. Of course they talked. Small towns survive on gossip. Every stranger becomes a mystery eventually. I looked toward the back exit near the storage shelves. Part of me was already planning how fast I could run if things got worse. The owner noticed immediately. "Kid, don't do anything stupid." That sentence alone made panic rise higher in my chest. Adults only say that when they think you're cornered. Outside, thunder cracked loudly enough to shake the windows. The officer was still somewhere in the diner asking questions while I stood trapped in the kitchen trying to figure out whether staying or running was worse. Then Lena suddenly turned to the owner. "You told him, didn't you?" The owner looked offended. "No. You hesitated when he showed the picture." "I hesitated because the entire county's looking for him." The room went quiet again. I stared at both of them trying to figure out who to trust. That had become the hardest part of disappearing. Every person felt like both a possible rescue and a possible threat. The owner lowered his voice. "Listen to me carefully, kid. That officer doesn't seem angry. Your mom's been all over the news begging people to help find you." I looked away instantly. Begging. That word hit differently. Because my aunt never begged for me to stay. She barely tolerated me being around at all. Trying to hold those two realities in my head at the same time felt impossible. Then the owner said something that changed everything. "They also mentioned your aunt." My head snapped up immediately. "What about her?" The owner hesitated. And suddenly the air in the room felt heavy. "She told reporters you've always been difficult. Said you probably ran away for attention." My chest burned. Of course she did. Even after I disappeared, she found a way to make me sound like the problem. Lena looked furious. "She actually said that?" The owner nodded slowly. Something inside me hardened right there. For weeks I'd been questioning myself. Wondering if I overreacted. wondering if maybe I misunderstood her words somehow. But hearing that confirmed it. My aunt didn't regret what she said. If anything, she was protecting herself. I suddenly imagined neighbors watching interviews. People shaking their heads while hearing about the troubled runaway kid. No one hearing the part where a grown woman told a 12-year-old nobody wanted him. That pain turned into anger fast. "I'm not going back there," I said quietly. Neither Lena nor the owner answered immediately. Because deep down, they both knew this wasn't just about a runaway child anymore. It was about what happens when a kid stops believing they belong anywhere. Before anyone could respond, voices echoed closer from the diner. The officer was heading toward the kitchen. Lena reacted instantly. "Back door. Go." This time even the owner didn't argue. I grabbed my backpack and hurried toward the exit while rain hammered against the metal door outside. My hands shook badly while turning the handle. Then just before stepping out, I heard the officer's voice enter the kitchen behind me. "You folks mind if I take a quick look around?" I didn't wait to hear the answer. I ran. Cold rain hit my face instantly as I sprinted behind the diner into the dark alley near the train tracks. Water splashed around my shoes while thunder rolled overhead again. I could barely breathe properly. Every sound behind me felt like footsteps chasing me. I kept running anyway. Past dumpsters. Past closed shops. Past empty streets glowing under flickering streetlights. The storm made everything blurry and chaotic. Cars moved slower on the wet roads, headlights cutting through sheets of rain while I searched desperately for somewhere to hide. But the town suddenly felt smaller than ever. Now that people recognized me, nowhere felt safe anymore. I finally ducked beneath an old railroad bridge near the edge of town, gasping for air. Rainwater dripped steadily from the concrete above while trains rumbled faintly somewhere far away. For a moment I thought I was alone. Then I heard another voice nearby. "You picked a bad night to run." I spun around instantly. A man sat beneath the bridge wrapped in an old green jacket, half hidden in shadows. He looked homeless, maybe in his 40s, with tired eyes and a gray beard. I stepped backward automatically. "Relax," he muttered. "If I wanted trouble, you'd already know." I stayed silent. The man studied me carefully before nodding toward the road above us. "They looking for you?" That question again. I hated how obvious I'd become. Instead of answering, I hugged my backpack tighter. The man gave a dry laugh. "Yeah, definitely looking for you." For some reason he didn't seem threatening. Just exhausted. Like someone who'd spent a long time watching life pass by from places people ignored. He pulled a small radio closer beside him. Static crackled through it before a familiar sentence cut through the noise. "Authorities continue searching for the missing 12-year-old." My blood ran cold. The man glanced at me slowly. "That you?" I couldn't speak. The radio announcer kept talking. Then came the second twist I never saw coming. "Family members now say the boy may be trying to locate his biological father, who disappeared years earlier." I froze completely. "What?" The man adjusted the radio volume higher while my thoughts crashed into each other. Biological father? Locate him? I'd never told anyone that. Not Lena. Not the police. No one. The announcer continued speaking over the storm. "A recent development suggests the child may have discovered information connected to his father shortly before vanishing." I felt physically sick. Because that wasn't true. At least, I didn't think it was. But suddenly memories started replaying in my mind. Old arguments between my mom and aunt. Conversations stopping when I entered rooms. A locked box in my grandmother's closet I was once told never to touch. And one strange moment just days before I ran away, when my aunt muttered something under her breath I didn't fully understand at the time. "He's more like his father every day." Rain poured harder around the bridge while the radio kept talking in the background. For the first time since disappearing that summer, I realized there might have been secrets in my family far bigger than cruel words. And somewhere out there, the truth about my father might still be waiting. The rain kept pouring beneath the railroad bridge while the radio crackled beside the stranger. I stood there frozen, trying to process what I had just heard. "They think you ran away to find your father," the man said quietly. "I didn't," I replied instantly. But even as the words left my mouth, doubt crept in. Because the truth was, I had spent years wondering about him. Wondering why he disappeared. Wondering why nobody in my family ever talked about him for more than a few uncomfortable seconds before changing the subject. The stranger studied me carefully before lowering the radio volume. "Families hide things," he muttered. "Usually because the truth hurts somebody." His words stuck with me long after the storm started calming down. That night, I barely slept beneath the bridge. My mind kept replaying memories I'd ignored for years. My aunt's angry comments. My grandmother's nervous silence whenever my father's name came up. The way my mom always looked exhausted whenever I asked questions about him. By morning I had made another decision. I needed answers. Not because I wanted to disappear forever anymore, but because I suddenly realized my entire life might have been built around secrets nobody wanted me to uncover. The problem was I had no idea where to start. That answer came unexpectedly. When I returned cautiously to the edge of town the next afternoon, Lena was waiting near the train tracks. The second she saw me, relief flooded across her face. "Oh my God," she said, rushing over. "Do you realize how worried everyone's been?" I looked down awkwardly. "Sorry." She crossed her arms, trying to stay angry, but her eyes softened quickly. "The police searched half the town last night." That guilt hit hard again. Then her expression changed. "There's something else," she said quietly. My stomach tightened instantly. "What?" Lena glanced around carefully before pulling a folded newspaper clipping from her jacket pocket. "I found this in the diner office this morning. The owner clipped it years ago because he said the story was strange." She handed it to me carefully. At first it looked like an ordinary article. But then I saw the photograph. A younger version of my father stared back at me from faded newspaper print. My chest tightened immediately. Below the photo was a headline about a factory accident in another town nearly 13 years earlier. Several workers had been injured. One man disappeared afterward and was never officially located. My father. I read the article twice before noticing something else. One of the witnesses mentioned in the story was my aunt. I looked up slowly. Why was she there? Lena shook her head. "I don't know." Suddenly everything felt connected in ways I couldn't explain. My aunt always hated talking about my father. She acted bitter whenever his name came up. And now somehow she was tied to the last place anyone officially saw him. My hands started shaking again. "I need to go home," I whispered. Lena blinked in surprise. "What?" "I need answers." For the first time since leaving that summer, I wasn't thinking about escaping anymore. I was thinking about confronting the people who'd spent years shaping my life around silence. The drive back to my grandmother's house felt unreal. Lena convinced the diner owner to help us after finally telling him everything. The whole ride there, my heart pounded so hard it hurt. Part of me feared nobody would even care I returned. But the second we pulled into the driveway, I realized how wrong I'd been. My mother burst through the front door before the truck even fully stopped. I had never seen someone cry like that before. She wrapped her arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe while apologizing over and over again. "I'm sorry," she kept whispering. "I'm so sorry." And for the first time in weeks I finally cried too. Not because I was scared anymore. Because deep down I realized someone actually had wanted me there all along. The reunion should have fixed everything. But it didn't. Because my aunt was standing silently on the porch the entire time. Watching. The second our eyes met, I felt that same cold feeling from the laundry room weeks earlier. My mom eventually pulled back and noticed where I was staring. Her face changed instantly. "What happened?" she asked softly. For a second I almost stayed quiet. That old fear returned. The fear of being dismissed. Ignored. Called dramatic. But then I remembered sleeping outside alone. Hearing my aunt tell the world I only wanted attention. Spending weeks believing I was unwanted. So I finally told the truth. Every word. The kitchen. The laundry. Nobody actually wanted you here. The silence afterward felt unbearable. My mother slowly turned toward my aunt with tears still in her eyes. "Tell me he's lying." But my aunt didn't deny it. Instead, she crossed her arms defensively. "He needed discipline." He was 12, my mother snapped. Things exploded after that. Years of buried anger came pouring out between them. Old arguments. Old resentment. Family secrets nobody ever addressed openly. Then, in the middle of all of it, my aunt shouted something that changed everything again. "You think he'd thank you if he knew the truth about his father?" The room went completely silent. Even my grandmother looked terrified now. My mother's face turned pale instantly. "Don't." But my aunt laughed bitterly. "You've lied to him his whole life." I felt sick. What truth? Nobody answered. I looked from one adult to another while panic rose in my chest again. Finally, my grandmother sat down slowly at the kitchen table like the weight of years had suddenly crushed her. Then she spoke the words that shattered everything I thought I knew. "Your father didn't abandon you," she whispered. My entire body froze. My mom started crying again quietly while my aunt stared out the window. The room felt impossibly small now. "What do you mean?" I asked. My grandmother looked directly at me with trembling eyes. That accident from years ago, she said softly. Your father was trying to protect someone? I couldn't breathe. Protect who? No one answered immediately. Then my aunt finally spoke in almost a whisper. Me. The silence after that felt endless. Because suddenly the story I'd believed my entire life, the missing father, the abandoned child, the unwanted kid, wasn't the truth at all. And sitting there in my grandmother's kitchen, surrounded by tears and secrets, I realized the biggest lie in my life had only just been uncovered. Nobody spoke for several seconds after my aunt admitted it. The only sound in the kitchen was my mother quietly crying beside me while rainwater still dripped from the porch outside. I stared at my aunt, trying to understand how one sentence could completely change the story of my life. My father hadn't abandoned me. For years, that idea shaped everything I believed about myself. It was the reason I always felt temporary in people's lives. The reason my aunt's words hit so deeply. If your own father could leave, then maybe anybody could. But now everything felt unstable. What happened? I finally asked. My grandmother looked exhausted, like she'd been carrying this secret too long. She folded her trembling hands together before answering. There was an accident at the factory, she said softly. A machine malfunctioned. Your aunt was trapped near one of the loading areas. My aunt looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Your father pulled her out before things got worse, my grandmother continued. But afterward, there was an investigation. The company wanted someone to blame. I frowned. So he ran away? No, my mother whispered through tears. He didn't run. That sentence hit hard. Because suddenly I realized nobody had ever actually told me what happened to him. They just let me assume. My grandmother reached into an old kitchen drawer nearby and pulled out a faded envelope. The corners were bent from age. He wrote this before leaving town. My hand shook while taking it. Inside was a letter written in messy handwriting I immediately recognized from the newspaper clipping. My father's. The room stayed silent while I read. Most of it talked about protecting the family from legal problems connected to the accident. Apparently the company wanted witnesses to stay quiet, and things became complicated after reports started changing. But one sentence stayed burned into my memory forever. Tell my son one day that leaving him was the hardest thing I've ever done. I read that line 3 times. Then a fourth. And for the first time in my life, I stopped seeing myself as the unwanted kid everyone tolerated out of obligation. My father loved me. He just disappeared under circumstances I was too young to understand. I looked up slowly. Why didn't anybody tell me this? My mother broke down crying harder. Because I thought hiding it would protect you, she admitted. Every time you asked questions, I panicked. I didn't know how to explain any of it. Then my eyes shifted toward my aunt. And you? She looked older somehow. Smaller. For the first time in my life, she didn't seem powerful at all. Just bitter. I spent years blaming him, she said quietly. Even after he saved me. Nobody interrupted her. I hated feeling responsible for what happened afterward. Your mother defended him constantly, your grandmother treated him like a hero. She swallowed hard. And every time I looked at you, you reminded me of him. The honesty hurt more than yelling ever could. So you took it out on me. She didn't deny it. My mother stood up so suddenly the chair scraped loudly against the floor. You told a child nobody wanted him. The anger in her voice shocked me because I'd never heard her sound like that before. My aunt looked ashamed now, but that didn't erase anything. I know, she whispered. No, my mother snapped. I don't think you do. The conversation lasted hours after that. Things were finally said out loud that should have been addressed years earlier. My mother admitted she worked constantly because she was terrified of losing everything after my father disappeared. My grandmother admitted the family avoided difficult conversations instead of healing from them. Even my aunt, through tears I never thought I'd see, admitted she spent years carrying guilt that turned into cruelty. None of it magically fixed what happened. But it explained it. And sometimes understanding pain changes how heavy it feels. That night, my mother and I went home together for the first time in weeks. The apartment looked exactly the same as when I left, but somehow everything felt different now. She had kept my bedroom untouched the entire time. My drawings were still scattered across the desk. My shoes still sat near the closet. She sat beside me on the edge of the bed for a long time before speaking. When I realized you were gone, she whispered, I thought I'd lost the most important thing in my life. I stared down at my hands quietly. Why didn't you ever tell me I mattered? I asked before I could stop myself. Her face crumbled instantly. Because I thought working harder was how I showed love, she admitted. I didn't realize you needed to hear it too. That conversation changed our relationship forever. Not overnight. Real healing doesn't work like movies. There were awkward weeks afterward. Difficult silences. Moments where I still questioned things. But slowly things became more honest between us. And honesty changed everything. A few months later, my mother stopped leaving me at my grandmother's house entirely. She found a smaller job closer to home even though it paid less. We struggled financially for a while, but our apartment finally felt peaceful in a way it never had before. As for my aunt, things stayed complicated. She apologized eventually. A real apology, not the kind adults force because they feel guilty. She admitted she projected years of anger onto a kid who never deserved it. I forgave her slowly. Not because what she said didn't matter, but because carrying that pain forever would have controlled my life long after that summer ended. Lena and I stayed in touch too. Every once in a while she called to check how things were going. Years later, I still think about how a stranger working at a diner became one of the first people who truly saw me when I felt invisible. And my father? That mystery took longer. Eventually, my mother told me everything she knew. After the accident and legal pressure surrounding the company, he left to avoid dragging the family deeper into the situation. There were rumors he moved across the country under a different name. Some people believed he started over completely. Nobody knew for sure. For years, I thought finding him would heal every wound inside me. But getting older taught me something important. Closure doesn't always come from finding every missing answer. Sometimes it comes from finally understanding your own worth. That summer changed me forever. At 12 years old, I disappeared because someone convinced me I didn't belong anywhere. But the truth was, I belonged long before I ever believed it myself. Looking back now, I realize kids remember words more than adults think they do. One cruel sentence can follow someone for years. But one act of kindness can too. An older woman giving me food behind a grocery store. A truck driver handing me $20. A diner waitress refusing to give up on a scared runaway kid. Those moments mattered. They reminded me the world wasn't made entirely of people who wanted me gone. And maybe that's the biggest thing I learned from that summer. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are speaking from their own brokenness, not your value. I spent years believing I was unwanted. But I wasn't. I was just surrounded by people carrying pain they never learned how to handle properly. And once I finally understood that, I stopped disappearing from my own life.